He's Dan Shaughnessy of the Boston Globe, and he has a new book. It's called Wish It Lasted Forever, Life with Larry Bird Celtics, now available online wherever books are sold. Really disappointed in you, Dan, with this book, because I wish it could have lasted forever. It's a shorter book. Like, I breezed through it. There were so many great stories, and I kind of went to the end. I go, damn, I needed more out of you, Dan. You let me down.
Well, that's really nice of you, Dan, and thanks for going through it. And Bill Walton, of course, named it, and Bill really wishes it lasted forever because we know his career could have been so much more, but he had this one gift at the end of his career, the 1985-86 season, where Bill Walton comes to Boston. He got 80 games in. That was it. He played 10 games the next year, and then he retired and, had his feet fused and all that stuff. But Bill said, empty the thesaurus when you write this, Dan. He said, this is like, I wish this could have lasted forever. Everything was great. You cannot overstate how great this was. Hey, this is a hop back in the Wayback Machine. It's, you watch the NBA today, and I sometimes long for the 80s. I was there when Larry and Magic came in 79, kind of rescued the league. And then, of course, Michael comes in 84 and leading up the Dream Team. But this jumped out at me, Dan, during the pandemic, when we're seeing the ESPN Classics and 30 for 30 on Celtics Lakers. And here in Boston with no games going on, they're running 80s Classic Celtics. And it's all we had. And I keep seeing my 30-year-old self sitting at the table back in the day when they allowed the lowly media to sit in those seats at the nail cell for $5,000. So we were there, and we had access that is never going to be replicated. We were able to tell the readers and the fans what these guys were like. It was a very fascinating, magnetic team, talented. Bird, McHale, Parrish, DJ, 5 Hall of Famers. They went to the finals 4 straight years. They were fun, and we lived with them. I mean, Dan, hotels, buses, airports, waiting for bags, flying commercial. This was when the reporters went to the COVID bubble in 2020, they had to sign a waiver saying they would not approach anyone if they saw him away from the facility. That's when we did all of our best work. I mean, the moat has gotten so wide here in Boston. We don't know what's going on with Smart and Tatum and Brown because nobody can get near them. In those days, we could tell you they're mad at Fitch. They don't like what the coach is doing right now. They need to change there. Casey Jones, bring him on, that kind of thing. It's nobody's fault. It's evolution, the way things have gone. But that was kind of what motivated the book. And thank you for perusing through it and getting some of those fun stories back in your head.
Was it a 30 for 30 or a last dance? Could you see that possibility? I mean, it's a shorter time frame with these guys and not as successful, but I was wondering if there's enough. It feels like with the stories you tell, and there's a little more drama, woven in there, but do you think there's a last dance feel to the Celtics of the 80s?
I always do. I mean, again, the personalities were so strong. One thing, because I went from that Celtic team, they were 50-1 at home, Dan, the last year, 50-1 at home. And I went to Major League Baseball, to the Red Sox clubhouse the same year as a beat reporter. And it just struck me how different it was, the climate in there. And I got Bruce Hurst in the book to talk about that because, he almost won the 7th game of the World Series with those 86 Sox. And they were a sour bunch. And he said in general, baseball was a sour bunch because Bruce Hurst knew the Celtics because he was friends with Danny Ainge. They had played Major League Baseball together and against each other. He would come to practice. He knew McHale. He knew Bird. He knew Parrish. And he said, in our clubhouse, we harbor personal feelings and there's insecurities and we compete against each other to get to the big leagues. It's kind of ingrained in the culture. He says, those Celtics, they were so secure in their own greatness. There was none of this, who's getting more touches. They had fun. They had fun at practice, competing against each other. They knew how great they were. And this all comes out, the kind of trash talking you're talking about with guys whistling. And I mean, that's Bird walking into the 3-point contest, the first one ever, and saying, which one of you guys is going to finish second? I mean, that's Bird telling the New York Knicks trainer he's banking 3-pointers during warm-ups before a Knicks game. And the trainer said it was Saunders. He said, you can't do that in a game, Larry. Said, if you give me $5, I will. And then he banked one in at the end of a game and ran down by the bench with his palm out looking for his $5. I mean, he was pool hustling during the games.
The story about Xavier McDaniel, is that true where Larry, after a timeout, tells X what he's going to do?
Yeah, Jackie McMullen tells that one really well, which is, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then he would do all those things. There was a game in Portland. He was doing that. It was near the end. And he said, you better get somebody over here. They were getting ready to inbound. They weren't listening. He pointed and then he took the ball. He drained a 3 and then he pointed again coming off. He said, I told you what you should have done. That was just, Quinn Buckner told me that there was a game called Knockout, just two guys shooting around in a gym. And Quinn said he could knock your ball away from the basket and make his shot with the same ball. He was playing basketball and pool at the same time.
What if social media was around?
I'll tell you, it changes a lot. And again, not in a good way, in my view. I mean, there was a level of comfort with those guys. I didn't make plans. Let's go to dinner. Let's go have drinks. But you would bump into each other and it was okay. So in fact, one night, Larry picked up the tab. It was like a total eclipse of the sun. I couldn't believe it. But most of the time, it was just casual. And I think that casualness is lost with social media. And they don't need us anymore. I mean, we're totally, nobody wants to talk to us anymore. I understand that. They got, social media. They got TikTok. They got whatever they got. And, connect. They got the Players Journal, connect with their own fans. And we're old guys. But back then, we were all the same age. And the money wasn't as great. We lived together. The moat wasn't there. And there was a little bit of trust. But still, there were times I had to violate that trust when Larry got in his barroom fight, messed up his hand for the playoffs. And he wasn't too happy about that. That's just the job.
But that's the tricky part. And I've mentioned on the show, I got too close to Mark McGwire. I got too close to Jason Jones.
Yeah.
And you still have to cover them. And I made it a point that I was never going to allow myself to get that close. Was there any part of you at that time that you want to be close to him? Gives you access, but can you report on everything you're supposed to report on?
You can't do both. And again, you don't need to be talking about how many beers somebody had the night before the game, unless they're in no condition to play, in which case we would talk about it. McHale had a pack of guys who would drive down from the Iron Range. There was no team in Minneapolis, but there was a team in Milwaukee. This Winnebago would park outside the Hyatt, and when the Celtics were going to play the Bucks, Don Nelson wanted to hire a suite for these guys because they would take McHale and Bird and Buckner and those guys out. There was a game where the Bucks, it was a noontime start. Think about that in Milwaukee. And the night before, on a Saturday night, the Minnesota crew from down from the Iron Range got all the Celtics wasted, and they got beat. They got beat badly, and McHale shot a donut. I think he was 0 for 8 or something. And Casey Jones knew enough not to yell. Everybody knew what had happened. Casey put his arm around Kevin and said, "Those guys aren't coming to Chicago, are they? Because we can't have this happen again." And when I talked to McHale about it, he said, "Just hearing those names, my liver starts hurting. Just hearing those names of my friends who come down there."
Well, didn't the Bulls cheerleaders buy Bird and Roby and those guys beers one night before a playoff game, and the Celtics won, and Larry walked off the floor and said, "Thanks for the beers." With the
I cannot attest to that one. And Roby was traded for Dennis Johnson, by the way, which is, you got a Hall of Fame guard for Rick Roby, who played about 10 games after that. But he was traded in part because he was Larry's running mate at night. And it was a dual purpose trade to get Dennis Johnson and to get Roby the hell away from Larry Bird. And it worked on both levels magically for everybody.
Were they the Bruise brothers, or what is it? Buckner and Roby and Bird, and I thought they had a nickname for their crew.
There were a lot of nicknames. I don't know that one, but they socialized, and there was, they had all been great college players at the same time. Larry was always jealous of Roby because Larry wanted to go to Kentucky when he was in high school, and Joe B. Hall didn't think he could get a shot off in the SEC. Instead, they get Rick Roby, who was even slower, but they won a championship with him. And Larry, anytime we'd be out, and somebody come over from University of Kentucky and shake Rick Roby's hand, Larry'd say, "That's the first time Rick Roby ever shook hands, didn't have a $20 bill in the other hand."
We're talking to Dan Shaughnessy. The book is Wish It Lasted Forever, Life with the Larry Bird Celtics. That'll be your reaction after you read it. You'll wish that it lasted longer. Available online wherever books are sold. I didn't understand, or I wasn't aware of the kind of the undercurrent there with Cornbread Maxwell and him and Kevin McHale, that Kevin takes his role and, Cornbread Maxwell, almost to the detriment of the team, just wasn't the same player, didn't care as much as he did when he was starting.
The curve on Max, I mean, he was the man when the Celtics were bad before Bird and McHale and Parrish, all those guys got there. When Havlicek was finishing up and they got bad in the late 70s, Max was the guy. He had been a Final Four player in North Carolina, Charlotte. He comes to Boston. He's the man. All of a sudden, these guys start coming in, and his touches went down. His shots went down every year he was in the NBA. I mean, every year Bird comes in, then McHale comes in. Maxwell, Bill Fitch takes him aside and says, who do you think is going to be guard the scoring forward of the other team now? That's going to be you, Cedric. You're no longer the offensive force. And he got his job done. Incredibly, he was clutch. He's the MVP of the finals in 81 before, when Bird's his second year in the league. And the MVP is Maxwell. And then in 84, Maxwell scored 24 points in Game 7 against the Lakers. It was his high game of the season, was Game 7 of the finals. He never got 24 all year. But that game, he said, hop on my back, boys, we'll bring it on home. He outplayed James Worthy. He got inside their heads. He was the guy. Unfortunately, he hurt his knee after that. And that's where the transition comes in, where he can't play anymore. McHale goes from 6-man, starts playing. McHale gets 56 in one game against the Pistons, and Max goes, I don't think I'm going to be starting anymore. And that was it. And there was questions about how hard he rehabbed. There was a little bit of hard feelings about that. But I mean, hey, Maxwell, his numbers up in the rafters. And he's one of the great voices in this book because he just tells you the truth about everything.
If Bird had stayed healthy, finish that.
Well, I think you get a few more years, but he played hard. And guys who play like that, the careers, I mean, we see it in baseball all the time, but it's hard to have a long career. You're diving on the floor. McHale didn't dive on the floor, but McHale played with a broken foot in the 87 finals. So those injuries, really, by today's standards, they were together a long, long time. They went to 4 consecutive finals together. They were in 5 finals. They won 3 championships. And Red always thought he might have kept them together a little bit too long and ran through it longer than he should have instead of making deals. So by today's standards, it's still a long run. Larry's from 79 to 92. That's still a pretty good run. But again, it's not LeBron James doing what he does now.
Yeah, but, and then you had Lenny Bias dying, Reggie Lewis. Like they Red had it, so the transition was going to be pretty smooth where the whole, the youth movement coming in was going to be able to handle any athletes they were going to face with the Lakers or Pistons or Bulls.
Yeah, Red knew his team was getting old when they won the championship in 86 and they went 50-1 at home. No one's going to do that again. So he also ends up getting the best player in the country because he had traded Gerald Henderson, a starting guard, 2 years earlier, thinking Seattle was going to go bad. The lottery came in. They got number 2. They got Len Bias. It was all teed up. Len Bias, Red used to have counselors at his summer camp. Bias had been a counselor for a couple of years, so they knew exactly what they were getting because Bias had basically been working out for him for 2 summers. And, Rick Carlisle had played with him in the ACC. Everybody knew what they were getting with that guy. And then, he drops dead the day after the draft, cocaine intoxication. And the Celtics never recovered from that. They didn't win again until 2008 when Danny Ainge was the GM. So it broke down. McHale had to play with a broken foot. Too many minutes for Parrish Bird. Walton's all done. And it started to crumble in the late 80s.
When I was working at CNN in New York in the mid 80s, and I would get to come up for the NBA Finals. And I'd get there, and if it was that Sunday and the game was played later on, and I'd go in there when Larry was shooting, I'd just sneak into the building, and it was cathartic. I loved hearing the dribble, and I loved hearing the net. And he never knew I was in there, but I went in there a couple of times, and I was worried that he was going to see me, and then, he would stop or whatever it might be, but no one's in there. Just somebody rebounding for him, and he'd just dribble, whoosh, dribble, whoosh. And it was wonderful. It really was.
Yeah, that was a routine at the Garden. About 4:30 in the afternoon. I was an early guy. I'd set up early. The Garden would be dark, be a little bit of light by that court. The equipment guy was Joe Catato. Larry'd come out. He brought him to Indiana when he went there and loved this guy, the equipment guy. And Larry'd do the perimeter, and I'd be setting up in my Stone Age computer porta bubble on the sideline right next to the bench when they used to let us sit in those seats. The lowly writers had those seats next to the bench. And Larry, he liked to break chops. He'd come over, and if he missed a shot during that thing, he'd say that the Bull Gang set up the rims, something wrong with the rim. Otherwise that would have gone in. And he'd come over and he'd say, what are you working on, Scoop? And I'd say, well, I'm doing an early edition newspaper story about your free throw streak. He was coming up on Calvin Murphy's 88 consecutive free throws. I'm like, so don't miss one in the first half because this paper's going to go up to Maine. It's going to look stupid if they open it up tomorrow morning and you miss when I'm writing about the streak. This is how it works. Sure enough, first half, he goes to the line for 2, and the foul line is lined up right where we're sitting if he looks over. He makes the first one. He looks over and winks at me between free throws, and then, of course, makes the second one. So all was good. But he was always thinking about these things. It's like paying off a bet in the middle of a game. He was doing 2 things at once.
I sat down with him when his career was over, and I went up to Boston, and Brad Lohaus said, "Hey, if you want to get on Larry's good side, bring him up a cooler and a six pack of beer." And so I stopped and got a cooler that was like $3, and I got a 6-pack, and I said, "Here." And he goes, "What is it, a fish?" And I go, "No, it's beer." I said, "Brad Lohaus told me to get this for you." He goes, Can I keep the cooler?" And I said, "Yes, you can." It was a $3 cooler, styrofoam cooler. And I go, I don't think it helped me with the interview, but it was just, that was the mentality of Bird there. It's like, all right, beer, cooler, can I have it? This is all right. I'm good with this.
That was the mentality. He used to go to matinees after practice at the Greek Orthodox College. They practice in Brookline. I would say, "Larry, how come you go to matinees?" He says, "It's cheaper in the afternoon." So yeah, he meant it.
By the way, how strong is the Mac Jones love in New England?
Oh my God, you are all over. I mean, I loved it from the start. They couldn't have known, he would outperform all the other quarterbacks to this stage. He was 19 for 23 the other day. They've won 4 in a row. They got the Titans game. They got the Atlanta this Thursday, and then the Titans are coming in here. That game, I don't know if that's going to get flexed to the prime time or not, but it's a big deal. Now this feels really good, Dan, because it's different and it wasn't expected. It's ahead of schedule, and rookie quarterback. We all know Bill hates him, and he's made a beast off him over the last 20 years. So he's got one of his own now, and they're managing it. It's really fascinating to watch it evolve.
Congrats on the book. And I meant when I said I wish the book was longer. It was that good, telling stories and, taking a trip down memory lane. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Take care.
Dan Shaughnessy. The book is Wish It Lasted Forever, Life with the Larry Bird Celtics. Available online wherever books are sold.